Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling The Climate Crisis is Humanity's Ultimate Macroethical Challenge, and Libertarians Can't Stand It. So, I am calling on some work I did about in 2012. Or a blog post I wrote about macroethics. And I didn't invent the concept of macroethics, but it was invented by someone, a technology writer and technologist who was observing that there's a different kind of ethical challenge in what I would call the operation of systems versus in individual choices that one makes that are, or imagine, let's say, the imaginary world of an ethicist focusing only on individual choices and a world of individuals, each of whom have approximately the same agency and power and so forth and so on. But if one, in my view, macroethics is the ethics of living as an individual within a larger system, most often a social system or a social technological system, a system with various capabilities that one's choice or certain choices by certain people have greater or lesser consequence due to the functioning of a system in which they are located in, that they are, to use a fancy word, imbricated in. Okay, forget that fancy word for now, but anyway, but they, in which they are embedded in. Okay, better word. So anyway, the reason why I'm bringing this up now on this channel is that I've done a few videos about the Atlas Network and their origins, basically at the birth of neoliberalism, where Friedrich von Hayek, who I am calling in this video one of the founders of libertarian economics. He's not, I mean, it pre-existed laissez-faire economics, pre-existed him by, a good half a century or century, but he was sort of the grand theorist of libertarian / Austrian economics. Now, I'm using the word libertarian loosely here. There's some libertarians who wouldn't necessarily cop to one or the other, and their libertarian is kind of a diverse, somewhat diverse category. But basically, this is a right-wing economics that believes that really the fundamental organization, the fundamental unit of organization of society is a market where people are trading most often goods and services. And so in any case, that is the natural state of affairs, or it's the optimal state of affairs if it's not the natural one, and that therefore anything that interferes with that supposedly spontaneous and natural process is deleterious, is bad, is evil, so forth and so on, leads to totalitarianism, is the antithesis of the liberal ideal of the free individual. Okay, and they call themselves classical liberals or new liberals or neoliberals, in other words, so that and this is a highly influential philosophy that has influenced government policy for the last 50 years throughout the developed world and also the developing world, and still maintains a very strong purchase in government policy making, in politics, and in academia, not directly but indirectly through its family resemblance to Economics 101, the neoclassical economics synthesis that is taught in most introductory economic classes, that uses some of the same abstractions of a market, of supply and demand, sort of that float above a physical system that includes, among other things, a government providing services and infrastructure for that functioning trade to exist, and for that supply and demand to even have an effect on people's livelihood and well-being, so forth and so on. So anyway, in this piece that I wrote a few years ago, or actually over 10 years ago, I talked about how macroethics is what is missing in our public life. It's something that is our civilization is doomed without an effective microethics. That was the name of the piece. And so, and I'm someone who throughout my life has been someone who's very committed to what I've discovered, 11, 12 years ago, is what is macroethics. In other words, that we need an ethics that is about systems, that is about operating within systems, that still recognizes individual agency within systems, within limits, within the limits of wherever they are, and also whatever they create within that context, social context. So anyway, I think it's very helpful to make this distinction between microethics and macroethics, because there are actors, including quote-unquote philosophers, who like to pretend that distinction doesn't exist, that systems don't exist, that differences in power don't exist, that differences in effect don't exist, that everyone is equal, and that we're all the same on an abstract level, which it becomes an obscuring of real power differences and real systemic features of the world and how our societies function. So I think an ethics without a concept of microethics and macroethics is an exercise in, can be masturbatory, can be self-gratifying without really having its appropriate impact on society. Now, of course, by bringing systems into ethics, one also potentially, can got politicized. So it can become very political very quickly when you talk about systems and ethical choice. And so I think in tendency, the recognition that there is a difference between microethics and macroethics, and that they're not unrelated to each other. In other words, that I think it helps to be a generally good person to have, in other words, to be on a microethical level, a good person, as a starting point to have a good macroethics. So I don't think one substitutes for the other. I don't think you can just sort of dismiss microethics as being something that's an ideological or bourgeois obfuscation, of reality. And I think there are people within the Marxist tradition who would say that. But I would say that they are avoiding some ethical assumptions and concerns, really, that Marx himself had, even though I wouldn't use him as the measure of the absolute, ground from which we should be operating as social beings and social theorists and so forth and so on. But he's an important figure and needs to be reckoned with. So his approach, Marx's approach, was dominated in some sense, almost exclusively macroethical, in the sense of he saw, in fact, as I was saying just a minute ago, that the focus on individual choices and so forth and so on was, let's say, in his theory at least. I think in some of his writings he sort of kind of shades into considering it in his historical writings, but he tended to focus on macroethics. And then subsequent Marxists, so on and so on, have almost exclusively avoided this sort of relationship, I would say, between micro and macroethics. So, but they're different things. So another way to, and this is getting in a little bit into abstractions that you might find tedious or whatever, but the relationship of microethics to macroethics is about an emergent property of systems. So as things become more complicated as you build up complexity. Systems get different properties to them that didn't exist in the individual parts. So you put together some parts, and it's not like each cell of my body is not the sum total of who I am, so forth and so on. They're differentiated. They do have different features and so forth and so on, just as the nuclei of my cells and so forth and so on, and then the proteins within my cells and all that kind of, just as in with your cells and within any other organism. So we are built up on a series of systems with different emergent properties, so that have different features to them. They wouldn't exist without the smaller components to them, and that you can find some of the roots to some of the behaviors of the larger system within the smaller systems, but they don't correspond necessarily one-to-one. They change in quality. Okay. So this relationship between the micro and the macro is also in this realm of society, in the realm of different social systems, that as our societies are more complex, or as they grow, they develop different systems within them that have different functions. And among those systems, of course, are governmental systems, and they have evolved over time, and they've changed, and they have their own emergent properties that cannot be wished away. And that's something that libertarians, among others, would like to avoid, or using the abstractions of their version of economics, which is somewhat related to some observations by Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations, that this invisible hand somehow was kind of arranging everything ideally. It becomes a quasi-religious belief. So there's a religious component to that, which I haven't addressed lately, but is also part of climate change denial. Anyway, so the macroethics, so climate change, or anthropogenic global warming, AGW, is what we're experiencing now in scads, in droves, in different weather phenomena throughout the world, and is laying waste to many ecosystems, and potentially to our food supply, or food supplies, certainly in different parts. Already has laid waste to many food supplies, not but has already been damaging to different to our species, and also to co-evolved species, which have been dying out in record numbers. So anyway, the idea that one should care about this broader system is a part of macroethics. In other words, macroethics assumes that you should care about, and you should also acknowledge its existence of a broader system. So what libertarianism does, and what Hayek's ideology encouraged people to do, is to assume that that these superordinate systems, or these things like governments and so forth and so on, were simply incrustations on this sort of spontaneous order. He wrote a book about spontaneous order, among other things, that was just going to happen without any direction or planning from governments or other officials, or even from private entities like monopolies and oligopolies, who do all kinds of planning to do their businesses. So anyway, this abstraction that he did is very, very attractive, and has also become the philosophical basis of climate denial. So the climate denialists are intent on stopping. They don't want to believe that capitalism could produce such devastation as climate change is producing. It goes against their religion, literally. So it's a religious belief, and they can't stand it. They cannot allow into their cognitive systems, because of their religious belief, or because of their feigned religious belief. So it could be just a feigning to protect their property. So one of the accusations of libertarians is that they're simply people who have an intellectual bent, or maybe it's the wrong word. They like some abstractions. They're trying to use their intellectual bent to protect their own property, protect their own privilege, their own power, and that's it. And they're trying to do it by making everything impossible. In other words, making it impossible. It's not making it, but by claiming that everything is impossible that contradicts their interest. So that, in other words, so their interest is to continue the fossil-based capitalism that they know, so that they are, and so they deny that climate change exists. So this is the intellectual basis of much of the Atlas Network, or they try to shoot the messengers. So shooting the messengers means shooting climate activists almost literally, to try to eliminate this consciousness, to shoot the messengers, to eliminate the consciousness that they have a we have a macroethical problem. We as a society need to care about other people. They don't want to care about other people. They don't want to care about the future. They don't want to care about their young. Okay, it's so anti-ethical. It's so empathic. And they want to also claim, for instance, that having empathy is a sign of weakness, or is a sign of being brainwashed by quote unquote woke ideology, or by some other or Marxism or communism. In other words, that caring about other people, caring about the greater community, is something that some political theorist has thought up and has browbeaten young people, or browbeaten me and young people, or so on and so on, to really to care about other people, and when in fact I should be just caring about myself and taking care of my own business and so forth and so on, and trying to maximize my utility and forget about other people and their utility, and so and therefore not to have a macroethics, or to have a macroethics that is only a composition of everyone's microethics. In other words, the few phrases of Wealth of Nation, not the entire Wealth of Nation, the entirety of Wealth of Nation, or the entirety of Adam Smith's work, but those few phrases that said, well, this sort of invisible hand is sort of spontaneously making everybody's felicity better by just simply trading and by just pursuing one's own self-interest. So it's become this permission slip to be a selfish a-hole, to be basically and it is so anti, and this goes against conventional ethical concepts from various religions, most religions. And so this this anti-ethical conviction makes people who subscribe to this extremely reactive, because they know that they're doing something bad. I mean, they're trying to convince themselves, and they've created a whole cognitive framework that is trying to give them permission to be as greedy as possible. And to be as self-interested. At the same time, they are so afraid of the quote unquote the unconscious, that they try to kill it. Okay, literally, or they're trying to ban it. And so this is where what these discoveries about the Atlas Network and how they're behind lots of criminalization of climate activists is this what I'm talking about, trying to kill their own superego, essentially their own from Judeo-Christian and other religious traditions, so forth and so on, that one should have a concept of the whole, the concept of the whole of creation, the concept of stewardship for creation, of not just sitting back, and that one should emulate sort of a caring creator by trying to be a steward of creation. One could sort of find that in some religious teaching. I'm not particularly religious, in fact, hardly at all, but some of our ethical impulses come from various religious teachings. So in any case, the anti-ethical or perversion of ethics that that is attempted by the libertarian / Hayekian tradition is creates or has individuals who are particularly vicious, you would say, in their reaction to the reminder that they are lacking in fundamental ethical concern, and what I'm calling, if they were so inclined to a macro ethics. So in other words, to understand the systems that we live in, and the understands that we have obligations to try to operate or change those systems rather than deny that they exist. So one of the, just to sort of, I'm going to stop pretty soon, but one of the tricks in some sense of neoliberalism is that it, even though it has this fantasy of a sort of anarchistic, or there's an anarcho-capitalist impulse within it, it actually is more about just simply using the powers of government for the benefit of the already wealthy and the already powerful, and simply accumulating that by saying, by attacking all the aspects of government, only those aspects that seem to help ordinary people or help the environment, help the less powerful individuals, the less powerful forces, or the less well-represented forces, though soon we will see, or we are seeing now, that climate is very powerful and can quickly wash away much of what we do in terms of what we've done in terms of infrastructure, so forth and so on, under certain conditions, so that are becoming more frequent and more probable in the future due to the heating of the climate. But anyway, this anti-ethical impulse makes these people particularly reactive to and try very, very hard to shoot messengers. Okay, and so anyway, I am just putting this out there. I will definitely be coming back to this theme, because there are some very important political lessons to be drawn from thinking about the ethical background to political and social action more generally, that it helps to think about those things, think about this distinction, microethics, macroethics, and also to think about what makes an effective political movement, in this case for climate action. If you think in terms of, or if you have a ongoing side discussion about ethics, not ethics as, we should all be really good and virtuous people, but ethics just in terms of like, how does ethics, how we think, conceiving of the good society, the good political strategy, the good, who is considered to be literally, the most good. What is the best? What's the summum bonum, the highest good? But also, what is the best way to be doing things? What is the best way to, and that's not, it's not to shame us and to make us feel inadequate, to just compare us to whatever we should be doing, but more just, there is a component to politics and to economic theory too that has an ethical component to it, that has especially understanding the macroethics, the differing theories of macroethics, really almost as an anthropologist first before you make recommendations. Anyway, I will stop here. Please share your comments and reactions in the comment section, and please like the video if you got something out of it, and please subscribe to Politics 2100, and I'll see you in the next video.